This is the North Carolina Rabbit Hole. I'm Jeremy Markovich, and if you've been watching the news recently, you see a lot of houses collapsing into the ocean on the Outer Banks. Now, this is not a new thing. It's not like it's never happened before, but it typically maybe used to happen around hurricanes or bigger storms, and maybe one or two would fall into the ocean. What's happening right now in Buxton is that more than a half dozen over the past couple days have collapsed and are getting swept away into the waves. And you might be watching these videos or hearing about this or seeing this and saying, okay, why is this happening? And why is it happening now? And why is it happening here? And why doesn't somebody do something about this beforehand, right? Like, if you know a house is going to fall into the ocean, why don't just tear it down before it makes a big mess? And why are they even on the beach? How do they get to the beach? Did somebody allow them to build on the beach? And who owns these houses? Like, I don't know. There are a million questions that at least I know that I have, and I'm sure that you do. And so to help answer them, I turn to the ringer here in this situation, a guy named Sam Walker. Sam's been a journalist for a very long time, lives on the Outer Banks, covers news on the Outer Banks for Sam Walker, obxnews.com. And he joined me to answer a lot of the questions that I think you and also I have had as we watch these houses fall into the ocean. You cover right now collapsing houses on the Outer Banks. Just simple question. Why is that happening?
Because we live on a barrier island, and barrier islands naturally move west. And when you put structures on barrier islands, they eventually end up in the ocean. It's as simple as that. The problem we've got now is that where the island wants to move to the west is in a spot that is highly developed. And right now that appears to be along the right north of the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse in the village of Buxton. Similar situation up in Rodanthe. And right now, the problem we got is that fact that we got Hurricane Aaron a month ago, and then we get the triple play that's happened to us this week, which is Hurricane Humberto, Hurricane Imelda, and then a strong northeast wind, and it's just wiped out beach. It's wiped out sand that's in the offshore that does the job of absorbing waves, and the houses have just fallen in. That's the simple part of it. It's a lot more complex, from regulatory issues to geology to weather, all that stuff is, but that's the basics. Is we're just out here, we're protecting you guys that live west of us from getting beat up by the ocean. That's our job out here. And unfortunately, because we've done development out here, we're paying the price of it.
Well, we'd all like to say thank you, actually, to you, Sam, for keeping us safe. That's very nice of you. I think one of the things that caught my attention was the first time that I can remember this happening in recent memory, and that was out in Rodanthe back in 2022. So you had one house collapse, another house collapse, and then that sort of made national news. And that was in Rodanthe. And a lot of these are happening in Buxton right now. So tell me about, like, Buxton itself. What does it look like? And these houses in particular, why are these the ones that they're falling in? Like, what's happening in Buxton at the moment?
Well, and this isn't an uncommon thing. I mean, I go back 30, 40, 50 years even, that houses that have been built on the oceanfront have ended up in the ocean. But the most recent events really started in 2020 in Rodanthe. They've shifted down south to Buxton. What's happened at Buxton is that we've just seen an area that has seen rapid erosion, where the houses were built that have collapsed. Just 10 years ago, had a 8 to 12 foot tall dune and had 200 yards of dry sand beach in front of them. And it's just the coastal dynamics of being with the convergence of the Gulf Stream and the Labrador Current. The Labrador Current comes from the north. The Gulf Stream, of course, comes from the south. The conflict that is created there is what created Cape Hatteras. It created the shape of our state, the eastern coast, and it created Diamond Shoals and the graveyard of the Atlantic. So just this area of Buxton is where the tip of Cape Hatteras actually is. It's a pretty wide area. If you look at it on the map, just inland, it goes, this is where the coast goes from facing east to facing south. So this area just has developed a hot spot. And then over the last 10 years, we've seen this rapid erosion event that has happened. And if you haven't been to Buxton, you'll hear say things like the motels or, the lighthouse is probably everybody's common frame of reference. What we call the motels is there's a line of motels as you come into the north end of Buxton on Highway 12. And then there's a large neighborhood to the south of that goes down to where a former Navy and Coast Guard base were located. There's a whole nother issue. And then the lighthouse. So you've got a large cluster of homes that were built in the 1970s, 1980s. Really, once that happened, they kind of maxed things out in the early 90s in this neighborhood. And again, 8 to 12 foot dunes, 200 yards of dry sand beach. Well, those 8 to 12 foot dunes are not natural. They were built, they were actually hand dug in the 1920s and 30s to put people to work in the after the Great Depression, part of the CCC, the Conservation Corps, that's done so many projects around the state. But what they did was they sent men out here to hand dig and build dunes along the barrier islands from Virginia Beach all the way down the coast. So this area had those dunes, and again, the rapid erosion that's happened over the last 10 to 12 years. We've seen two beach nourishment projects take place off Buxton, and that hasn't stopped this erosion event. So all that sand is gone that was helping to absorb the wave energy coming in, and you get repeated storms, and it's not just hurricanes. Hurricanes get all the glory because they got names with them. And even though the Weather Channel likes to name other storms, those of us who are weather geeks don't like that because it's confusing and they come up with some weird names. But we get winter storms that you guys get snowed on and we get rained on and blown on, but 40 and 50 miles an hour for 3 or 4 days. And 12 to 20, 12 to 15 foot waves come in from these storms as they pass offshore. And it just beats and beats and eats and eats and eats all that sand. Well, that's what's happened here. And so it's two real major hot spots that have developed here on the Outer Banks. And there's multiple others, but it just so happens these are the two that have houses that have fallen, are threatening to fall. And that again is Buxton, as you mentioned, Rodanthe. And the Buxton situation really just came out in this last 2 weeks. It was the first time a house had collapsed in Buxton in over 30 years, 2 weeks ago. And that was after Hurricane Aaron came through 2 weeks before. And it was just a regular northeast wind that eventually this one fell. Well, then we throw in what's happened over the last couple of days, and you get 7 houses down in just over 24 hours, including 5 in the span of 45 minutes. That's how crazy it got. And a lot of that's debris related, but that's the science behind it, the basics of it. And if that sounds too complicated or wandering, sorry, but I think we're all kind of getting like, oh, can we just get done with this one around here? Because it's exhausting to try and cover this.
Yeah, I would imagine just you don't know when it's going to happen. You know it's probably going to happen based on
Yeah.
where they are, but just waiting for it to happen. And I think even it sounds like even the people there are. It's not like a surprise to anybody.
Mm.
And one of the things I think that maybe I don't know if it comes as a surprise to people, but you have an example of this was maybe the more famous one, the what people know as the Knights in Rodanthe house, or it's
Right.
the Inn at Rodanthe.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point of that movie, if you saw it with Richard Gere and I believe Diane Lane, where they're just
Yep.
basically making out in this house the whole time,
Mm-hmm.
they the house was on the beach. Like that was the whole like crazy visual of it. And the house is no longer on the beach. It didn't collapse. They moved it inland and now it continues to exist and now you can stay the night there. And I think that's an example of like what you can do when the ocean is coming for your house. And just to ask sort of a dumb question, why don't more people do that? If they know the ocean is coming for their house, why don't more people just move the house?
It is a morass of regulatory issues at the state level and the federal level. And you bring up Serendipity is actually the name of that house. It, of course, got changed because of the movie, because of the book, the movie. That house got moved. That house is now threatened again, where they moved it. And we can talk about that in a moment. But so you've just got this regulatory issue out here. And it goes back to the early 1970s when you were seeing the start of really people considering doing the New Jerseyization of North Carolina's beaches and start putting up jetties and start putting up boardwalks and put up rocks and all this stuff to harden structures. And the Coastal Area Management Act was passed by the legislature in the 70s that created the Division of Coastal Management. It also created a state law that you cannot put hardened structures on our beaches. And that being, you can't put rock walls up. And again, you can't put concrete boardwalks like they have at Myrtle Beach, like they have in Virginia Beach, and everywhere else up in the north of us. And that created the uniqueness of North Carolina's beaches and especially the Outer Banks because it attracted people to come here. But it also created rules that if you are developed, if you build a house or you build a business within a certain distance of the ocean, you no longer can do that. You have to have a setback from the high tide line. The average mean, the mean high tide line is the technical term, but it's the average where the highest water comes up on an average day. You have to be set back with your structures, whether it's an oceanfront house, a two-story house, whether it's the deck, it's a gazebo, it's a pool, all this stuff. Unless you get a variance, just like you go to the city council or the county commissioners to get a variance, you do the same thing with the Coastal Resources Commission. But those rules now were put in place. The houses that were built, like I said, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, well, the ocean, again, has come farther west. The barrier island is trying to move west, and it can't because of natural processes that are no longer allowed because of development. So once you get an oceanfront house that's within, I want to say the number's 200 yards, essentially. But once it's within that 200 yards of the mean high tide line, you can't build on. You've got to either let it go. If more than 50% of the structure is damaged, say in a fire or any other means, if more than 50% is damaged, you can't rebuild it. It's got to go. It's got to be torn down. So what's happened is you have people whose property has been absorbed by the ocean. They've got to a point where they can no longer have people in the house because the septic tank's been compromised, all that stuff. They condemn the house, and it just sits there until it falls because the insurance companies won't pay you to tear it down. Trying to find somewhere to move it's not easy, especially in Buxton, because there's not a lot of developable land left. That's oceanfront, or at least on the ocean side. So what do you do with a house that you can't move anywhere? You let it go. Rodanthi's a little different because there is some available spots, but there's only so many that are outside of that buffer zone. Throw in the other government entity that gets involved here. The largest single landowner in Dare County, North Carolina, is the federal government. Cape Hatteras National Seashore, the first national seashore created in the United States. The Department of Interior manages the largest tracts of land of anyone. So the beach itself is actually the park. So you've got a house that there's no longer any beach in front of. Cape Hatteras National Seashore actually is in the water in these areas. So what happens when that happens? Well, the property's still there technically, but it's the beach. So it's a big, huge regulatory mess on top of the mess that's happening with these houses that are falling.
One of the other things that I'm curious about is if they know that these houses are going to fall into the ocean. And this is like, I guess they is sounds like everybody, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
pretty
again,
much.
not a surprise. You're like, "Oh, this thing is in the sand. Like maybe it's going to make it." The answer is no, it will not make it. And like you said, it's abandoned, it's condemned, you can't do anything with it. And you know that when it collapses, it's going to cause a huge mess, which I want to talk about in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then why not tear it down? Why not pull it down before it causes a big mess? And I remember in reporting on this before that there was something called the Upton-Jones Amendment, which
Hmm.
tried to make that possible and it went away. So, why did that go away? And why don't people do the proactive thing and just pull it down before it goes and makes a spectacular viral video that ends up on the internet and then causes a gigantic mess that spreads along miles of shoreline?
So the Upton Jones Act, which was created by the federal government to essentially to fund buyouts of properties, to buy out threatened homes, and it wasn't just about buying out homes, on the ocean. We're talking about houses that are built in floodplains, inland, whether it's Princeville, whether it's Kinston and places like that have seen historic flooding events where people built houses inside those floodplains. And that money was designated by the federal government to do that. The state had a similar program. Senator Mark Bass Knight, who was the longest serving Senate President pro tem, the second most powerful position in North Carolina government, who's from here in Dare County, and he created a program like that. It was so popular, it ran out of money so fast, and the people who didn't get it, what was going on there, said, we're not doing this again. We're not paying for some rich Manhattanite who owns 12 beach houses to, we're not buying them out. Well, that's not who you were buying out. You were buying out a lot of people who worked at the Ford plant in Norfolk and took that money and invested it to have a place that they could afford, but they end up turning it into a second home, but they also turn it into a rental property and essentially a business. That's who you were buying out. You weren't buying out, somebody who lived in, worked in federal government. I mean, not federal government, but that worked in a lobbying firm in DC. So yeah, it was so popular with the people who wanted to take advantage of it that it ran out of money fast. And then those who weren't for buying out these properties said, no, forget it. So yeah, that's one thing. There's been some opportunities. National Park Service was able to take advantage of some of the money that came from the offshore oil and gas leases and tapped into that fund that's designed to buy more land for the national parks and national forests and national wildlife refuges. So they took advantage of that and did actually buy two properties in Rodanthe that were threatened and had them demolished before they had a chance to fall in the ocean. And it was like, oh, great, this is coming. This is a great idea that we're going to see in the future. Well, of course, that all happened in the Biden administration, and then we've seen what happened in 2024. That seemed to have gone away. Nobody wants to do that anymore. As far as why we're letting houses fall in, it's not that we're letting houses fall in. These homeowners have no other option. If they can't move it, what are you going to do? Well, you let it stand there. You try to keep it running as long as you can. Insurance companies aren't paying to tear houses down. They're just not going to do it. Because that makes no sense. I mean, from a business angle. So the homeowners are pretty much, they have their hands are tied. If they tear it down themselves, how are they going to pay the mortgage? I mean, because a lot of these places are mortgaged. They can't pay the mortgage if you tear something down. So the only true option for them is let it go, and then the insurance will pay off the mortgage. They may pay off the debris contractor to clean it up. In most cases, the homeowners have been pretty good about getting a debris contractor that when a house collapses to go out there and try to clean up as much as they can in conjunction with the Park Service. Some have not, and the Department of Interior's had to go after those people and try to get money back, and they've been successful sometimes not. So, but there you go. There again. This is such a complicated matter. I will give some props to Joy Christ, who's editor at the Island Free Press, islandfreepress.org. She has written very extensively about this. And just recently, she's got a 2-part series. The second one dropped this past week, in fact, that really explains all this in detail of why there's so many things involved with why we're just letting these houses go. And we try to use that as answers. And of course, social media, good gosh. People say, oh, how did they let somebody build a house out in the middle of the ocean? Well, they didn't do that. Again, 50 years ago, that house was, 200 yards from the ocean. We could get into the whole barrier island arguments and all that stuff, but that's essentially why this situation we're in now with 7 houses collapsing in 48 hours, and this massive amounts of debris washed up on our beaches of Hatteras Island is happening.
I want to ask a few more questions about, I don't know, specific things. And this one is very time sensitive, and it may not be relevant if you end up listening to this or watching this in, I don't know, a few months from now, or maybe it will be. I don't know.
Mm.
But there's a government shutdown that just started, and obviously the Park Service is included in that. So if they are sort of responsible for the cleanup that happens along the Outer Banks whenever a house like this collapses, or at least, they're the ones that are in charge of shaking down a homeowner that won't pay or coordinating those that do. Um, what's going to happen with all that debris that's happening along the Outer Banks at this moment with the shutdown? I mean, do we have answers to that right now, or is it unclear?
Yeah, it's a little unclear when this happened. Of course, the timing on it could have been worse in terms of this government shutdown that started on Tuesday on October 1st, or Wednesday, October 1st. With the conversations we've had with our Park Service people, very off the record, they are being very careful. They have told us that they have people coming, their people are able to respond to it, and that the typical what happens is other Park Service personnel from other parks are sent down to help with that situation. Because it's a public safety issue, it's kind of falls in the under the thing that's in this 9-page document that's on the Department of Interior website that came out yesterday, that says, if things of public safety, they're able to at least, expend a little bit of money that's in reserve for such things as that. But beyond what happens with this event, we really don't know. And they're not able to talk to us. Nobody in Washington's talking about it. It's, this whole thing, this shutdown coming when it has, which is right at the height of the fall fishing season. It's right at the height of our shoulder season out here on the Outer Banks. And as I said, we've got, the largest landowner is the National Park Service, Department of Interior, and you've got 3 very popular sites out here. Cape Hatteras National Seashore, Wright Brothers National Memorial, where the first flight took place, Fort Riley National Historic Site, where the first attempt at an English settlement took place. They're very popular. And, on top of trying to deal with cleaning up beaches, you got people that are trying to come out here and spend money with us to go fishing and go see things and enjoy a week out here in the shoulder season when it's a little cheaper to come out here. But there's a lot to do. Yeah, that it brings that it's again, it's another complication into this mess that we've got out here. But the response we've gotten from the Park Service so far is their people, they've got a people working on it. One thing that has happened is Dare County itself has stepped in, something they haven't done before because they kind of was outside their responsibility. They couldn't legally do it. They've stepped in, and the debris contractor that they have for storms to remove when we have hurricanes out here, for, whether trees fall or roofs and things like that happen, away from the beach. Because there's people who actually don't live on the beach. There's people that live on the sound side where you're supposed to live out here on a barrier island. They send out here to clean up. They announced yesterday they're going to have their contractor work with the homeowners. They're going to work with the regular folks who have already been picking up things and dragging them to Old Lighthouse Road. So we've got a little more clarity on, there's people that are going to be cleaning this mess up once things calm down. But the Park Service itself, their involvement is going to be a lot less, it looks like. They're just going to do what they have to. But, how long this shutdown lasts, we don't know. What the last one was 35 days of this similar situation. So, we'll see what happens after the waves calm down and most of the debris is gone. What's left out there could be out there for a while. But one thing about us, out here on the Outer Banks is, whether you're left or right, this is a different world out here when it comes to certain things and environmental stuff. You'd be surprised the people who actually care about the environment that you wouldn't think would politically. And we'll go out there and drive out on the beach with an empty pickup truck and start loading up boards if we see them. We're pretty good stewards out here when it comes to that stuff for the most part. So, there's people on this. It's just going to be a little different than what we've seen in previous events when we've had house collapses on Hatteras.
Yeah. I did want to ask a question about this seems maybe kind of niche, but it did come up. One of the rabbit hole readers, Kelly Fitzgerald, asked me about this and said, okay, well, like, what's the deal with like who owns the land, right? Like, so if you bought a bunch of land and you at one point, in the 70s or 80s had 200, 300, 400 feet of property ahead of you and then the beach or whatever, and now that land is gone and now your house is on the beach, like do you even own the land underneath? And I know a little bit about this, about sort of the rules of the high water line, and also there are some rules in North Carolina about even if you do own the property, if it's a public beach in front of the dunes, the public has a right to be on it and that sort of a thing. But yeah, like if your house is sitting in the water, do you even own the property underneath it? Do you even own the house anymore if it's gotten to that point?
Yeah, technically you do. Because I mean, if you go and look at the Dare County property records, again, you'll see the actual lines on the GIS that show where these houses are, and you'll see the line that's the beach, and you'll see the next property, and you click on the next property. Well, that's Department of the U.S. government. So yeah, technically they still own it, even though North Carolina state law, the dry sand beach, the mean high water mark is public. We don't have private beaches here, even though a couple of our towns up here on the Outer Banks would make you think we don't. Uh, and that's a whole nother thing we could get into on a rabbit hole. Um, but yeah, the technically the people who own those houses that are standing now in the breakers, they still actually technically own them just because that's how the property laws work in North Carolina. And so until they surrender it, and that's what usually happens is once the house collapses and it's torn down, they'll end up selling it, essentially selling it. We've had some people who've had property that had no houses on it. They still own the land. The towns had to buy it. Nags Head has that situation where they end up having to buy that land. Now, obviously, the value of it drops to nil, where it might have been $500,000 property when the house was standing there and everything was functioning, and then it went down to $5,000. They got enough basically to pay the transfer tax on the actual transaction. That's about it. So yeah, so technically they still own it, but it does create all kinds of issues where people, are allowed to walk on the beach. Are you walking on somebody's private land? Yeah, you technically are, but uh, nobody's really legally challenged that. We saw this situation in Emerald Isle a couple of years ago. Pacific Legal getting involved with that couple that sued the town because they wanted a right of way in front of the beach, and that was turning into trying to overturn North Carolina's public beach law. So yeah, there's a lot of legal mumbo jumbo that's involved with that, but essentially, yeah, they still own that until they no longer own it.
What can you tell me about the people who own these houses along the ocean front, that have collapsed in? I remember looking into one that collapsed in 2022, and it was bought by like a real estate agent in Tennessee who
Mhm.
had bought it and I guess was running it out for a couple of years and then, as a revenue stream, and then the house collapsed and obviously the stream dropped.
Mhm.
Is there anything else you can tell me about the people who own these particular houses? Because one of the things that's interesting, I think that you mentioned, is that, a lot of people sometimes in the Outer Banks are not North Carolinians. They're from New Jersey or the
Mhm.
Northeast, where they have different rules
Mhm.
around the beaches, and they think beaches are different, and they think the rules are different, and they come to North Carolina and find out that they're not. Um, so are these all just people from New Jersey that bought second houses, or are these retirees? Are these people who live there or rent them? Like, what do we know about these particular houses?
It's a wide range. We've got. I'm quickly going back through my memory here of looking at the property records for some of these that just fell. You've got somebody who lives in Chesterfield, Virginia. Somebody who lives in Chesapeake, right across the border. You've got, I think there was one from Raleigh, and there's a couple others. It's a wide range. Some of them are people who had bought in the Rodanthe situation. A lot of those were people who bought in the post pandemic era, post pandemic rage, or post pandemic fad, or whatever you want to call it. But in the post pandemic real estate market, dropped in, saw how popular Outer Banks got, saw an investment opportunity. The ones in Buxton, a lot of those are family homes. Meaning they were built in the 1970s by people who had enough money to say, hey, you know what, I want a house on the beach. And they invested wisely, or, they're not uber rich. They're regular people, business owners. Like I said, when we used to have the Ford F-150 plant in Norfolk, there's quite a few people who took that money they made working hard, a long time for, labor job like that, who invested in a house that was pretty cheap at the time and just kept it in the family, didn't rent it. It was a family. It was where they went for the weekend because they drive, it's an hour, 2 hour, 2.5 hour drive from downtown Norfolk to there. So that's really, it's just a wide range. It really isn't something, again, the houses that are falling, these are not people who are multimillionaires and 3-story, 15-bedroom houses. These are 4 or 5 bedroom salt boxes that are the ones that are falling in this situation.
Is there anything else quickly that people should know about the situation that they might misinterpret if they just see a video like this drifting by on social media? I mean, you've lived out there for a very long time. You and I think everybody else lives out there for a very long time, has a different interpretation of what the Outer Banks are really like. So is there something else about this situation that you think is important for like us outsiders to know, that if we don't deal with this sort of thing day to day, month to month, year to year?
That we're not just letting this isn't a situation where we just like throwing our hands up and walking away. There are a lot of people working on this to try and find a solution, to try and find a way for these homeowners to not lose their investment, to lose their dream, but at the same time protect, what is the most unique environment, the most unique coastal place in the world. Nowhere else is like here. This isn't a situation where that's what we're doing. Like, just forget it, just let it go. We're trying to find solutions. Sadly, a lot of the solution is money. If we could go out here and pump sand on these beaches every year, yeah, I know some people, you get into a whole argument about that, whether beach renourishment is worth the money. Well, when you've got the 3rd best tourism-based economy in the state of North Carolina, yeah, it looks like it's pretty, and that beach is the reason people come here. It's a pretty good investment. But people do care. It's not a situation that we're just throwing our hands up and walking away. These people do care about this place, and they care the fact that what they have had and their house is causing damage, and permanent damage possibly, to a place that they love. So it isn't a situation of just people being callous, out here. We care. Everybody cares about it, whether we cover it, whether we live next to it, or whether we fishing. I don't like catching 2x4s when I go fishing, but that's not fun. But at the same time, we care that this is happening to these places, and we don't want it to happen because, it's not a situation where we're just walking away.
Yeah. Sam, if you and I have ever had a podcast just like full time, this could be that's a whole nother story with Sam Walker. Because every story is like, oh, well, that's a whole nother story, and it's probably a good one. But I appreciate your expertise on this. I mean, you've helped me out, a lot of people across the state out for years, figure out what's going on in the Outer Banks, and I really appreciate you talking to me about this today. Sam Walker from OBX, SamWalkerOBXNews.com, and also Joy Christ, who is from the Island Free Press, who also did a great job over the years and including now of explaining all of this. So I appreciate her help, and I appreciate your help, Sam.
Thanks, Jeremy. And I appreciate what you do because, hey, look, even though you're a transplant, I love the fact you tell our story so well. So.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah. Take care, Sam.
Thanks.
Many thanks to Sam Walker and Joy Christ from the Island Free Press. If you want to read more of their reporting, you can find that in the description below. And as always, if you want to read more about this sort of thing all the time, you can go to ncrabbithole.com. There you can find some of my previous reporting about the Outer Banks and houses collapsing into the ocean, and other stuff like this delivered to you weekly. It is free if you want it to be, ncrabbithole.com. And if you've enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you would share it with other people, subscribe, give it a like, all of the things you do when you like videos, and it would really help me out a lot to do that as well. I'm Jeremy Markovich from the North Carolina Rabbit Hole, and I'll see you next time.